And last week I just went consciously and just went without slowing down.
And you did well. Thank you.
What time was it when I hit the end of the Amida before Hallel?
Oh my God. 7:53, 54. It was.
I would have been done had I just gone through talking and whatever. I would have been done before 8.
Yeah. I'll get it. No, I got you. Okay. Yeah.
And the main. By the way, do we need the main ones to be there? I normally only do Wednesdays. So whether or not I come tomorrow is. I make no promises. I make no promises about tomorrow. Wednesdays I'm here. Thursdays I'm on. Every word.
How is he?
How to? Oh, is that? Where is he? I'm not sure he's here, but let me know if you want to talk. Okay.
Today is usually one of his days.
Let me know. I don't see
I'm
you.
so happy you're here. It's not the same with that.
And what are you doing here? It's going to be streamed too, so you guys can sit right there. Where are we sitting? You guys can actually come over here this way. You guys might be the audience. What do you usually have now?
PE.
PE?
Yeah.
Oh, but how come no PE? How come no PE today?
Because I think it's you. We're
Me?
supposed to come down here.
Okay, we'll do a spiritual PE. Okay, just to let you guys know, this is streamed, so it's online. Yeah. What time does this go till for you guys?
55.
8:55?
Yeah.
Oh, so you'll leave in the middle. Okay.
Should test this.
Hello.
Testing.
It's streamed, so they can just sit right there. Yeah, and 8:55 there. So you guys can just leave when you need to leave. Yeah, I'll go till like a little after 9, but all good. We usually start earlier. Are we on?
It will be here, so if you just press.
No, I mean online.
Oh, yeah, you go ahead. I'll tell you when.
Just do it.
Do you want to give me the when to tell Roy to start?
Oh, we can do it now. Yeah. It's hot in here. Okay.
Wait, from Adam? Are you sure? Did you ask?
This? How come the switch today with this?
They asked me to switch, so
Oh, instead, you mean,
I'll have them tomorrow for another day.
oh, but how come no PE today? Instead,
It's this time slot.
yeah, but how come they doing this instead?
Yeah, they're coming here and then I'll get them tomorrow at a time.
Oh,
slot.
got it, I see.
They'll make it up.
You're good.
Good. Okay, good morning, everyone. So we are streamed. Welcome. Every month we do this class. It's called Mitzvah of the Month, and we usually do a mitzvah in the Torah that is related to our lives. This week, we're actually doing a mitzvah in the Torah that is not in the Torah, and it's Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is Israel Independence Day. And what's the date? May 14th, 1948. But the 5th of Iyar, today is actually Rosh Chodesh Iyar. It's the new month of Iyar. That's why the class started a little late, because it's a longer service. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So I just want to talk about, we know our old holidays, right? In the Torah, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Passover, Shavuot coming up, the Omer. That's all there in the Bible. But all of these sort of modern holidays, the month of Iyar is called the month of the Yoms. On Monday was Yom HaShoah, which you I'll lead a beautiful, beautiful Holocaust Remembrance Assembly. Next week will be Yom Ha'atzmaut. First, Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day, and Yom Ha'atzmaut, Independence Day, which of course in the secular American calendar is very different, right? We don't put those two together. May 20 whatever is Memorial Day, which in America is usually lacrosse and barbecues. And we think perhaps about our veterans, but we don't necessarily, unless you're directly connected to a veteran, really have that in our consciousness. I say that just on a personal note. In Israel, if you've been on Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day, it's a very different mood. And I want to just share one story about Yom HaZikaron. Have you heard of Michael Levin? No? Beautiful. Yes? Probably not them, right?
We used to go to the graveside when you used to take the 8th graders.
Beautiful. So I'm going to tell you the story of Michael Levin, and it's important for those watching as well. Michael Levin grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He went to Camp Ramah, not in Ojai, but in the Poconos. And then after high school, he went to study in Israel for a year on Nativ, the one-year gap program in the conservative movement. And he loved Israel so much that he said, I'm going to stay in Israel and join the IDF. When he decided to join the IDF, he was a very short young man. And they're like, I'm so sorry, but you're not going to be in an elite unit. You can sort of help and volunteer. And the story is told that when Michael Levin went, he literally jumped over the wall to talk to the people in charge of the army because he wanted to be in the army so bad. And they're like, what are you doing? He's like, no, I'm going to be an elite paratrooper. And the commander basically said, it's the first person that tried to climb into the walls to be into the army as opposed to trying to get out of the walls. And he ended up doing that. In 2006 was the second Lebanon War. The first one was in 1982. Which is way before you were born, but actually I was born. So do you know my first name? Erez. Do you know what Erez is? It's a cedar tree. Have you ever seen the flag of Lebanon? Yeah, you can Google it later. The flag of Lebanon is basically red and white, and in the middle is a cedar tree. My dad, as you probably know, is also a rabbi, and in 1982, he went on a mission with rabbis to Beirut, Lebanon, right during the Second Lebanon War. And you know, on Friday, we say the Psalm for Shabbat, Psalm 92. You know, Tzadika Tamar Yifrach. You heard that? And then Ke'erez Balvano Niske. The righteous shall flourish like the palm tree. They shall thrive like a cedar in Lebanon. And in 1982, when my dad came back and I was born, he named me Erez after the cedar of Lebanon on the tree because he had just been on this rabbinic mission when there was a war between Israel and Lebanon, the first Lebanon War. The second Lebanon War in 2006, Michael Levin was on break from the army. He went to Camp Ramah in the Poconos. His army unit was called back, but they said, Michael, enjoy your vacation. You need to stay with your family. And he said, no, I cannot stay with my family. I must come back. He came back, and I was actually in Israel during that week. And unfortunately, he lost his life in the Second Lebanon War in Lebanon. And when he was buried in Mount Herzl, which is the military cemetery, just like we have down the street on Veteran Avenue, his parents were very worried because they had no family in Israel. He was a Chayal Boded. Have you heard of a Chayal Boded? It means a lone soldier, right? So when you're a lone soldier, you don't have anybody to go home to for Shabbat. People adopt you, right? And his family was so worried that nobody would attend his funeral. And you need a minyan. You need 10 people to say the mourner's Kaddish at the funeral. And what happened? There was traffic that was literally just jammed in Jerusalem. And his parents were worrying, well, what's happening here? There must be something going on. And at that moment, they realized that the entire city of Jerusalem, and literally the entire country, came out to pay respects to Michael Levin. There's a beautiful documentary about him. It's called A Hero in Heaven. And his parents then started an organization with lone soldiers to make sure that they would always be taken care of in Israel. As Ms. Kashari just said, often on Yom HaZikaron, which is next week, people will visit his grave. And not only that, every single birthright trip for many, many years would visit Michael Levin's grave. I'm telling you this story because on the first Yom HaZikaron, after he passed away, Rabbi Guzik and I were in Israel, and we decided to go there. Here's an interesting part of his story. In 2001, right, when a lot of trips to Israel, just like right now, were canceled because it wasn't the safest place to go, not Michael Levin really wanted to go to Israel. He was in the 11th grade. But all of his friends said, no, we're not going to go. And so instead of going to Israel that summer, they went to Europe, right? And his counselor on that summer was Rabbi Guzik. And he was the worst behaved kid on that trip because he didn't want to be in Europe. He didn't want to be in Spain or France or Italy. He wanted to be in Israel. And for the first time in Rabbi Guzik's life, she met Michael Levin's mother at his grave on their first Yom HaZikaron after he passed away. And it's jammed on Yom HaZikaron in Har Herzl. It's literally shoulder to shoulder. It's my only time there. And at 11 a.m., the siren goes up, and we went over to him, and Rabbi Guzik went to his mom and said, I was Michael's counselor on that trip that he didn't want to go on. And she said, you're right. He didn't want to be on that trip. He wanted to be here, and now he will be here forever. And for every trip that we go to Israel, we always pay respects to Michael. In fact, if you go to the Jerusalem market, the Shuk, in the best rugelach that you will ever have in marzipan, there's even a picture of him. He was literally a hero in his life, but also, of course, he's a hero in heaven as well. And actually, he influenced many other Americans to make Aliyah, one of them being Max, I forgot his last name, Steinberg, from Woodland Hills. Because Max went on a birthright trip. He went to Israel. He heard Michael's story. He said, you know what, I'm also going to join the IDF. And unfortunately, Max also lost his life in another round of fighting in Gaza as well. And so these stories that we tell, we of course hear the older war hero stories, but we also hear the stories of Michael Levin was my age. I know you should talk to Miss Mashbaum. She knew him very, very well. And when you hear of those stories, it's not just a name, it's not just a grave that you visit, but it's a life that allows us to also be Jewish here as well. Yes?
We met his father one time.
Oh, there? Wow, on Yom HaZikaron. Yeah. So an amazing, amazing story. His family's from Philadelphia, huge Phillies fan. Actually, his grave, I believe, in Har Herzl, have you ever seen the veteran cemetery, how every single grave is the same? Right? No matter if you're an officer, a sergeant, whatever you are. Same thing in Har Herzl, but I'm not sure if it was with him or not, but his grave is a little different in terms of photos, and it became sort of a heroic piece to go to as well. That's Yom HaZikaron, but I want to talk about Yom HaAtzmaut, which is Israel's Independence Day. I want to look at some sources, because like I said, you cannot open up the Torah, which I'm going to take the Torah down to the preschool in a little while, and you cannot find any sources of Yom HaAtzmaut. It will not tell you celebrate. So how do we celebrate? What do we do? What do we do on Yom HaAtzmaut? I got an email from the teachers saying that our kids should what? What are you going to wear next week? Black and white for Yom HaZikaron, but the next day you're going to wear blue and white. But let's talk about Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day, as a religious holiday. What do you do in the Siddur? Today, actually, on Rosh Chodesh Iyar. What special prayer do we add each Rosh Chodesh or each holiday? Say it again. Hallel. What is Hallel? Yeah, a set of prayers praising God. Yavarech Beit Yisrael, we praise God. Hodu l'Adonai ki tov, ki olam chasto, we thank God for God's kindness. I want to read you a halacha, a Jewish law. This is from a more modern rabbi, Rabbi Elazar Malamed, known as the Panini Halacha, and he says this. There is a mitzvah to establish a holiday of rejoicing and praising God on a day when Jewish people were saved, right? So what other holidays do we celebrate because Jews were saved? Basically everyone, but what's some major ones? Hanukkah, Pesach, Purim. Let's stop with those three, okay? Because by the way, is Purim in the Torah? No, it's in the Megillah, right? But it's not in the actual 5 books of Moses. Is Hanukkah in the Torah? No, it's in the book of Maccabees. Pesach absolutely is. I want you to think about the location of where those holidays are. Don't tell me yet, but think about where we were as Jews when those miracles happened, okay? It was on this basis that the rabbis established Purim and Hanukkah as permanent holidays. This is what this rabbi says, right? How did Hanukkah and Purim become these permanent holidays? Because there was a miracle that the Jews were saved. So if there is a time in history when Jews were saved, this rabbi says that it should become a permanent holiday. Even though one may not add mitzvot to the Torah, we say lo yasor mimenu, that we shouldn't add a mitzvah to the Torah and we shouldn't subtract the mitzvah to the Torah. There are 613 mitzvot, and we do those mitzvot, and you shouldn't add or subtract. Now, do we perhaps interpret how we do them for sure. That's why we have different types of Jews, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, etc. But a mitzvah is a mitzvah. So don't add. So how can we add a holiday if we can't even add a mitzvah? It says, when we left Egypt, we were delivered from slavery. God commanded us to celebrate Pesach and sing praise to him every year. And then it talks about Hanukkah, and then it talks about Purim. Now I want to go down to this. In the Talmud, it says this. Then how do we recite Hallel? So we recited Hallel today because it's Rosh Chodesh, right? It's a holiday in the Torah. But next week, should we recite Hallel for Yom HaTzmaut? Is it in the Torah? No. So raise your hand if we say we should recite Hallel. Malena, why?
Well, because maybe it's kind of by extension, because, God commanded us to celebrate Passover because on that day God saved the Jewish people. And then God saved the Jewish people many other times, and it could be kind of an extension of that mitzvah.
Beautiful. Right? An extension of the mitzvah of God saving the Jewish people. V'hi sha'amda lavotenu. That's what we gave a sermon about on Passover. That, right, in every generation there has been somebody who has risen up to try to hurt us. V'omdim lachalotenu u'matzil hakadosh baruch hu miyadam. But God has saved us, right? Now, it's interesting because a couple of weeks ago, if you remember when they had the missiles flying from Iran and boom, they were all shot down, right? That was a miracle. So the Talmud also says, lo samchim al hanes. We shouldn't rely on a miracle. So I like to say that, in fact, we create miracles. How are all those things shot out of the sky? How did it happen?
Man created it.
Human, yeah. And how did what things shot it down? Things like the Iron Dome, who you heard from Ari Satcher last year, David Sling, Arrow 2, Arrow 3, things that is like science fiction that we human beings created, then not necessarily created the miracle, but allowed the miracle to happen. So there's the opinion that you just sit back and God just lets these miracles happen, or I would say the opinion of with that participation of the divine, we have the ability to create miracles, right? And not in the moment. You have to think about that. When Iron Dome and all these missile defense systems happened, it was created over years in order that, God forbid, one day something happened like a few weeks ago, we would actually be prepared. So let's go back to where these miracles happen, because the Talmud says this. Let us recite, if we're going to recite Hallel on Pesach, which we do, then we should also recite Hallel on Purim. The Talmud says, Hallel is not recited on Purim. Any guesses? Why would we not recite Hallel on Purim, but we would recite Hallel on Passover? What's that? Okay, that's number one. It's obviously in the Torah. But where did the holiday of Passover happen? Yeah, not in Israel. Where did the holiday of Purim happen?
Outside of Israel.
In Persia, in Iran? Well, if they both happen outside of Israel, then let's recite Hallel, because they meet both qualifications. It's outside of Israel, and the Jews were saved. This is what the Talmud says. This is the brilliance and also the craziness of the Talmud. It says, Hallel is not, because here's the rule. Hallel is not recited on a miracle that occurs outside the land of Israel. So we should only recite Hallel when it's inside the land of Israel. Purim, we said, outside. Passover, outside. So what do the rabbis say? Sorry, I have to continue this. Here. Prior to the time when the Jewish people entered the land of Israel, all lands were deemed fit for songs of praise to be recited for miracles. But after the Jewish people entered the land of Israel, and all the other lands were no longer fit for songs of praise, then we don't do that. So here's the deal. When Purim happened, when Passover happened, did we have a land of Israel yet? No, we were just Israelites going to Mount Sinai, right, to get the Torah at Mount Sinai. And so we were saved, but we didn't have a land of Israel yet, so let's say hallelujah. Literally, let's say Hallel. When we had Purim, right, did we have a land of Israel? We sort of did, right? They were in exile, but there was a land of Israel that had been, right? And so the rabbis say, since there was a land of Israel that we theoretically could go to, then Purim doesn't count for Hallel, right? Where did Yom HaTzmaut takes place? In the land of Israel. So perhaps, what should we do?
Say Hallel.
We should do Hallel. We have two opinions, though, of course. And so even to this day, some people will say Hallel, and then some people will not say Hallel. Based on these both theological, how we think about Israel and God conversations, and also the reality of what Israel means to us as a state of redemption, right? So the little things that you might see here in the chapel on Yom Ha'atzmaut are affected by how we think about our connection to the land. And it's interesting, right? When we say the land of Israel versus the people of Israel versus the state of Israel, right? Even though it's the same thing, there's actually three different things, right? We have the land of Israel, which has changed its borders many times, even since 1948, right? 1967, 1973, as land has been given and taken. We have the state of Israel, which is obviously the government, and we don't really do the politics. And we have the people of Israel, which means all of us here, right? If we decide tomorrow to make Aliyah, we can, right? We didn't have that opportunity in 1947, but in 1948, and actually last night, was anybody here last night for the Noah Tishby? Yeah, so Brian Goetzing was. We talked about Noah Tishby. Does anybody know who Noah Tishby is? Yeah, she spoke with the NFL player, Emmanuel Acho, who's African-American, the book is called Uncomfortable Conversations with the Jew. And he said, I didn't know anything about the Jewish community. I only heard this word Zionism. I didn't understand what it meant. And they had a public conversation about very intense ideas. And the idea of Zionism basically was the right for Israel to exist. Whether you agree with what Israel does, how Israel does it, that's secondary to the fact that actually it does exist. And so in our lifetime, since we do have an Israel that does exist, we have to then think about what is our relationship as Jews in the diaspora to this land. So I want to do two more things. So that's Hallel, right? Another thing that you'll see in the liturgy, which I'm not sure if we do this here or not, but often we'll do a Haftorah as well. So when do we usually do a Haftorah? Shabbat, right? Or holidays, but usually not in the morning minyan. So even today, when it's Rosh Chodesh, it was a longer service, but we do not do a Haftorah. The only times we really do a Haftorah in the weekday, besides a major holiday, is Tisha B'Av, which is sort of sad, which is the 9th day of Av, commemorating the destruction of the temple. But we also have, right here, in the back of our Siddur, on page 343, we have a huge Torah reading. And then on page 345, from the book of Isaiah, we have the Haftorah. And it's interesting because it's a very similar Haftorah to what we read on Passover, and that's the vision of Ezekiel and the dry bones. Have you heard of Ezekiel, the prophet? Right? So there's a very famous vision of Ezekiel looking into this valley, and literally the bones of our ancestors are dried. And basically they say, Lo ovda tikvatenu, ovda tikvatenu. We lost our hope. And when we sing the Hatikva, what do we say? Od lo avda tikvatenu. Naftali Hertz-Imberg, who wrote the Hatikva, changed the words of Isaiah, where the people look at the prophet and say, we've lost hope, we have no hope for the future. And he changes those words and he says our national anthem becomes Od lo ovda tikvatenu. We have not lost our hope yet. That's a huge change in our shift in how we think, right? From we don't have any hope to we have not lost our hope yet. And those words carried us for so many years. In 1898, Theodor Herzl actually died in 1898. And he said, in 50 years, we will see the creation of a Jewish state. What's 1898 plus 50? 1948. How amazingly prophetic is that, right? 50 years from the time he said in 50 years this will happen, we actually had this state. And Israel has transformed, right? Ask your teachers, who many of them were born in Israel. The Israel that they see today is not the Israel that probably you were born in, correct? The Israel that I see in my own life, right? And if you don't go back often, then when you go back, it's like a transformation, right? Tel Aviv, if you look at the original pictures, right? Why is it called, what's a tel? Anybody know what tel is? Yeah?
It's basically when there has been like several civilizations or
Uh-huh. So that was Tel Aviv. It was basically sand dunes, right? What is Tel Aviv today?
City, like a
Yeah, a huge metropolis. Actually, I was listening to the podcast of Dan Senor. If you haven't heard him, you should definitely check him out. It's called Call Me Back, and he has the top Jewish and Israeli thinkers. And he was talking to a professor at Columbia University called Shai Davidai, who's become very famous in the last couple of weeks. And he said, actually, sorry, it wasn't him. It was Scott Galloway, he called himself a fallen Jew, somebody who was not observant, no nothing. He was literally just born Jewish. And he teaches at NYU. And he said October 7th sort of reawakened his Judaism. And he said, all you have to do is bring somebody to Tel Aviv to explain what the Middle East and Israel can be, right? Not necessarily what you see on TV. In fact, Rabbi Guzik and I just went out to breakfast yesterday with a couple of pastors who are in this neighborhood. And they asked us how we were doing, and we asked them how they were doing. And they said, even in their churches in this neighborhood, what we talk about here about Israel, they speak about, but then they said, but they've never been there, right? And so it's very hard to speak about, just like it's hard, as Noah Tishby and Emmanuel Acho said yesterday, it's very hard to speak about somebody and love somebody that you actually haven't met or spoken to. It's very easy to speak about somebody, right? We know that. It's very easy to type something to talk about somebody to somebody else, but it's very hard to say something negative about somebody that you actually know to their face because you're in conversation, having those tough conversations. The same thing is true when you visit someplace, right? Anybody been to the Grand Canyon? Yeah, so I've heard of the Grand Canyon. I flew over the Grand Canyon many times, but not until I witnessed it and saw its beauty did I really understand what it's like to experience it, right? Or if you ski and you go to Mammoth or the beautiful sights in nature, right? You can talk about that, but you can't really understand until you actually experience it. And so the last piece that we do on Yom Ha'atzmaut is a really interesting thing, and we do these psalms. But one of the psalms that we do, and if you go to a place like Camp Ramah, and you actually, Birkat HaMazon, right? Baruch atah Adonai, the grace after meals. There's one piece that we add on Shabbat and on holidays. So you change a word at the end from Magdil to Migdol, but you also add a psalm in the beginning. Do you know what psalm that is? Beautiful. Shir Hamalot Beshuv Adonai et Shivat Zion Hayinu Kechomim. In English, Shir Hamalot, a song of ascent and aliyah to the Torah. Beshuv Adonai et Shivat Zion. When God restores the fortune of Zion, Jerusalem, Hayinu Kechomim. We see it as in a dream. What do you see in a dream? When you have a dream, what do you see in a dream? I'm not really a dreamer. Like, I go to sleep and I don't remember. My kids are dreamers. They wake up and they're like, this is what happened, this one. Oh, wow. When you have a dream, what do you see? What do you feel? A minute? But what do you...
I'm living it.
You're living it. You're imagining it, right? And in this Psalms, Psalm 126, right? It was imagining it. And this psalm was actually sung not in Israel, but very far away for years and years and years. And the beautiful book that's actually called Like Dreamers by Yossi Klein Halevi. And he talked about 1967 when Israel reclaimed Jerusalem as the capital. And he says, Hayinu kechomim, we were like dreamers until we actually had Jerusalem. The harder part is when your dream becomes reality, what do you do with that, right? Do you say, oh, we're all good now? Or do you actually have an opportunity to dream again, right? Another famous book that you might have heard about, actually, in social studies, The Startup Nation, right? The Startup Nation was just, 15 years ago or something like that by Dan Senor. And what did he talk about? How we had a dream of Israel, and now what's our next dream, right? How do we keep moving forward? And then Dan Senor just wrote a new book that just came out right after October 7th, even though it was written before, and now it's called The Genius of Israel. How do we take the next step? Okay, we've done all the high tech, now all the Israelis are selling all their businesses, moving to Silicon Valley and stuff like that. But then what is our next step? Because if we're just gonna stay in sort of that same place, then we're gonna get stuck. How can Israel continue to actually be that Or LaGoyim? And so I wanna do one last one. And this is interesting. What is the purpose of the state of Israel? This is what the Pnei Halacha says. Again, this rabbi is an Orthodox rabbi in the 20th century. He says, the establishment of the state of Israel removed the disgrace of exile from the Jewish people. All of us are living outside of Israel, right? It's called galut. It means in the diaspora, but it means exile, right? We're outside our actual land. Generations after generation, we wandered in exile. We suffered dreadful humiliation and bloodshed. We were an object of scorn and derision among the nations. We were regarded as sheep led to the slaughter, to be beaten and humiliated. Strangers said to us, you have no hope. You have no expectation. The situation was a terrible desecration of God's name, because God's name is associated with us. And when we are degraded, God's name becomes degraded too, right? And for many, many, many years, I would say since the Holocaust, in the Ashkenazic world, in the Persian world and Sephardic world, as Jews were exiled, right, not from Israel, but actually from their own countries, we had an Israel to go to. And now, as we see what's happening even in our own neighborhoods, right, it's we have to think about that. And so we get calls from high school students, from college students. What is the role here as a synagogue, as a Beit Knesset, as a house of gathering, as a Beit Tfilah, as a house of prayer, and as a Beit Midrash, which is what you all do every single day here, in a house of study. What is our role here? And it's really interesting. We all sit here in a bubble, but as I spoke to you guys a couple of months ago, in 8th grade, you're about to leave a bubble, right? You'll go to some Jewish educations, you go to some schools that are not fully Jewish, and then what is your role to not only bring Judaism, but represent this state, this land, and this people? And as Rabbi Eliezer Malamed says, right, as Jews in the diaspora, how do we represent basically an entire people as well? And finally, do one last one. Sorry. Finally, we're going to look at the prayer for the state of Israel. My grandparents did not have this prayer to read. Right? My grandfather was from Poland, came to this country in the 1930s, didn't have a state of Israel. In fact, my dad was born right before the state of Israel was created. But now every week we say this prayer. It's interesting when we talk about how to add ritual to our prayers. Every morning in the Minyan, we would never say the prayer for the state of Israel. Since October 7th, we actually say this prayer every single day. So I'm going to read the prayer for the state of Israel to conclude as we go into the week of the Yoms, Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut. And I want us, and it's also interesting, to say one last thing. On Yom HaZikaron, going into Yom HaAtzmaut, on Har Herzl, on this Mount Herzl, where the military cemetery is, it's like this immediate shift. And I was shocked when I went to Israel on that day in 2007, where we're sort of sad, and then we're like immediately happy. It's not a normal thing, right? It's not a normal thing to do both of those emotions. But the state of Israel allows us to do, almost like commands us to do. But I've been reading a lot of what's going to happen next week in Israel, and they said, we're not going to have the fireworks. We're not going to, have necessarily the party, as we still have hostages in Gaza. And each year they have people light the masuot, which are the torches that start this day of Yom HaAtzmaut. And I read that this year they are not going to just honor individuals, but they're honoring groups of people. And the groups, I wrote this down, I think it's really beautiful and fascinating. It says security forces, rescue forces, rescuers, readiness security, meaning community people who protect. And I thought this is a beautiful one, public diplomacy. And one of the people that is being honored was actually here a couple of weeks ago, Yosef Haddad. Have you heard of him? Yeah, a Christian Arab from Nazareth who enlisted in the IDF. And when he said something that was so interesting that he was here, he said, I was not a soldier in the JDF. I was not a soldier in the Jewish Defense Force. I was a soldier in my own country of the Israel Defense Force as a Christian Arab. And it's really amazing, and I want you to think about this too as you graduate, how you not only use your voice, but how you also find other voices to uplift. And I'm going to leave you with this story. There was an article last week in Newsweek magazine. Well, it's, I guess no longer magazine, it's on the screen. And the author was a 27-year-old named Hamza Hawadi. Doesn't sound like a Jewish name. He's a Muslim from Gaza. And he was 27 years old, and he's seeing what's happening on our college campuses with a lot of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. And he wrote very proudly, and he's getting a lot of hate for it. He said, what you're doing on your college campuses to the college students, I promise you is not helping me in my journey of being a Palestinian in Gaza. He asked, where were you 17 years ago when Hamas came? Why did you wait 17 years ago, right? Where were you? And it's interesting, as you follow him, you also then open up a whole world of other people that are trying to use their voice, but are not being heard because of the difficult voices that are shouting them down. And so I reached out to him. And honestly, I was scared to reach out to him. And this past Sunday, he actually spoke to a group of rabbis that I work with. And he's living in Germany right now. And he's sort of stuck. But he said, I'm going to use my voice. And I said, what can I do to help you? And he said, all I want to do is share my message with your community. And even though sometimes it's hard and scary to, just like last night we saw with Noah Tishby and Emmanuel Acho said, I was scared to enter into a conversation with somebody who was Jewish. He said, then he had Shabbat dinner and it solved everything. He said, food and conversation I can do, right? But once you begin to know the other, to meet the other, it's easier to have the conversation, but also we have to, as Noah Tishby said, be proud of also who we are. We can't go back into hiding who we are not, rather showing the pride who we are with respect, with strength, and with also love. He said you need three things: grace, truth, and love. If you put all those together, that I think should really be our kavanah, our intent as we celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut this year. 76 years. Each time that Israel has been a state under Jewish sovereignty, under Jewish control, it's only lasted 75 years. This is the first time that the Jewish state will last 76 years. And it's up to all of us to make sure that 76 goes to 77, goes to 777, goes to 7,777, and further. And so we are kicholmim. We are living out that dream, but also as this next generation, we have to think about what our next dream will be in order to make sure that we get to continue the special celebration of Yom HaAtzmaut. So I'm honored that our 8th graders were here with us for Mitzvah of the Month. And even though it's just one day of Yom HaZikaron Yom HaAtzmaut, let's continue for this whole year. I've watched and witnessed what you all have done over this past year. It's unique, it's remarkable, and honestly, all of us are living history, and we have to continue to be active in that history and not just read it in a book as well. So it is important to say Chag Sameach, even though there's very difficult times. It's important to take a moment next week and celebrate what Israel was, is, and what it will continue to be as well. So thank you for joining, and have a great day. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.